Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Southern Outdoorsman Podcast. I'm excited because blood has been drawn, boys. This week, little baby brother Thomas Myers done got him one. Thomas, how are you?
Well, thank you for that introduction. I'm feeling pretty good, though. It was, first week of the season, already got a buck down, so
Why don't you hold him up?
Come on,
We
let's
just
see it.
talked about this. You got to hold the buck up so people can see it.
On public land.
Yep.
Give him a little turn. There you go. 9 point. And first deer ever
With a
shot
bow.
With a bow.
Yep.
Yeah, so we got a lot to talk about with him. That's a fantastic buck, especially with a bow. So congrats to you. We're going to talk about that story. I think we're going to hit some Q&As like normal, but towards the end of the podcast, we're going to get right into this. And we're also going to talk about how Jacob is bad luck. And but first, we're going to talk about these little grunt calls.
Yep.
Jacob, why don't you give us a rundown on what this grunt call is?
So we've actually done a collaborative grunt call with Houndstooth calls. So Houndstooth, we work with, known Lyle Gilbert, the owner, for probably 6-7 years now, and we've always wanted to do a grunt call with him in the past, just because it's something that, again, we talk a lot about on the podcast. The actual using a grunt call. Again, killed one buck last year using the grunt call, and then called in another buck the next day in the same spot. And it's just super effective. So we finally have a limited edition Southern Outdoorsman branded grunt call from Houndstooth. So super, super excited about it. It's got one thing that's interesting about it, it's got a metal tone board in it, so it gives off a very distinct kind of grunt. And also the awesome thing is it's super easy to run, and it doesn't stick. I've used grunt calls in the past that have a lot more of just a plastic reed, and on the colder days, especially if you have a lot of spit in your mouth, and you don't realize you're actually spitting into the grunt call on accident.
Yeah.
And it will bog that call down. If it's real cold, again, we don't deal with a whole bunch here, but I've dealt with it up in Arkansas. That sucker will freeze, and it does not work. So you don't have to worry about that with this call. So, again, super, super awesome. And,
Well, I know you've had success in Arkansas calling in some deer. I remember you were calling in a bunch of bucks when you killed that bear. And you messed up on a couple bucks, and then you wound up killing a bear. And then around here, you've had a lot of success grunting. I haven't had a ton of success grunting yet. I think I'm doing it wrong, which is why, as we're talking about this has been your preferred grunt over the last couple of years because you can get it pretty soft. And we talked about this with Dr. Carl Miller a couple weeks ago on the Deer Vision podcast. We also talked about deer hearing in that podcast, and he was talking about how the frequency of a grunt, like that sound, is right in the peak hearing range of deer, meaning that they can hear that tone very, very, very well. So you don't have to be as loud on a grunt call as you might think. That's probably been my problem. I've been just roaring on that sucker. Yeah. So, and one thing, with the turkeys this year, this past spring, just how soft you were calling, it worked with the turkeys, but you kind of do it similar with deer, right?
Yeah. It's unless it's crazy windy or something, or you see a deer, which I haven't had to grunt at a deer from a super long ways away. Kansas is probably gonna be different. You see a deer at 500, 600, 700 yards, you're not going to be calling to them quiet, especially with the wind. But especially down here in the South, it's if you're in and around some kind of thick bedding, or there's a quality food source close to bedding, it's I don't really think you have to be all that loud. And again, it goes back to Richard Fott's episode 290, Calling Deer the Right Way with Richard Fott. He talked about that whole bunch too. It's real soft grunting. He calls it a tinning grunt, but there's a really short grunt and doing 4, 5, 6, 7 of those, back to back, and then stop. And, call every 15 to 20 minutes. And, again, did it last year, and it worked awesome. Awesome. Which, I've done it for a couple of years now since we did that interview with Richard. And it's something that I think if you can build confidence in using a grunt call, it can make you even more versatile in certain situations. And again, I'm talking blind calling, not just calling to a deer that you see, but specifically blind calling. That's where I've had more success with it, is actually blind calling than calling directly to a deer. Because the thing is, if you can see directly to that deer, unless you have some really good cover around you, again, around the base of your tree and stuff that the deer can't see to, if you're in somewhat more open woods or on the edge of some big hardwoods, and the deer can see for good ways, more than likely he's not going to come in for a shot specifically with a bow. But the one I killed last year, called him in 6 yards, shot him. The next day, sat the same tree, called another buck in to 10, 12 yards, and he went step all the way out. There was blood right there from the first deer I shot.
He's oh man, this looks kind of sketchy.
Yeah, he's I don't know if I want to come in there. And then
this used to be a nice neighborhood.
And then we did our SOA hunt, and I called in one morning, I think $3, at least $2 one morning on the edge of a clear cut. And it's so awesome because especially like right at gray light, like right when you can start seeing okay, like you can start seeing shapes and colors and not colors. If you start seeing shapes and stuff at, 30, 40, 50 yards, doing a couple soft grunts like that. And that's where I've had the most success is like right at first light doing some grunts. When those bucks are kind of on their feet, they're kind of walking around, they're kind of working their way potentially back to some kind of bedding, they're cruising a little bit and getting them to change direction and come in and check you out.
Yeah, and one thing that Richard talks about specifically, and I wanted to bring this up again because we're right here at the perfect time of year for people to start calling like this, especially if you live maybe a little bit more north of us and your rut is actually starting to happen right now. These are tactics you should maybe try like right now. For us down here in the deep south, our rut's a little bit later, so you got some time still. But he would say, go around in a circle grunting like 15 times in a circle. Why don't you just demonstrate that for us real quick?
I can't really go in a circle in this chair, but let me move my mic real quick. Just like that. I mean, super soft. Actually comes over louder in the microphone than what it really is. But again,
Because you're right there on top of it.
yeah, but like just having good control and you're not trying to do like a buck roar or anything like that down here in the South. Like I'm trying to think. I think I've heard that one time, and it was a buck chasing a doe, but it wasn't like a big. It was like I don't know, maybe like a 2-year-old, like little 6-point, and he was like,
Yeah, I've
and
heard
you're
that.
like,
He sounds like
God.
a duck running around.
You're like-
Those
you're
young bucks.
You're like, I don't like that one bit. That's terrible. But anyway, doing those soft grunts like that, I have a lot more confidence. And Rich talked about that in episode 290. Again, calling deer the right way. Again, not available on YouTube. It's only available on audio platforms, Apple Podcast, Spotify, iHeartRadio, stuff like that. But he mentioned that episode. If you want to build confidence doing this in calling where you're not scaring deer, like when I used to grunt in the past, I always thought like I didn't like doing it because I was like potentially scaring deer.
Yeah.
Well, what I started doing, I did this in Arkansas probably 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago. And I had does come out to like maybe 60 yards and they were feeding on some red oaks. And I'm like, I'm just going to try this. Thomas actually was hunting with me. And I grunted a couple times just like that. And the deer would kind of like pick their head up. They'd look around and they just go right back to feeding. Like the does did not care one bit. And that gave me a lot more confidence. As long as I'm calling like that, it's a curiosity aspect of or sound that, a buck could pick up on and come in and just kind of check it out. But the does like just did not care. Like it didn't freak them out. And Richard talked about doing that, like calling with does 50, 60 yards away, just still calling like that because he's like, hey, I got the live decoys right now. Like the does are here. Let me imitate like a buck's down here, kind of messing with some of the does. So again, I think it can be extremely effective, but you just got to build confidence with it. And again, softer is always better than going loud and kind of toning it back. So you can always get louder. If you start out real loud and start toning it back, maybe not be as natural in that setting.
Yeah, and hunting with you over the years, because again, I haven't really had a lot of success grunting, but hunt with Jacob over the years, he would be like, hey, hit that grunt call a couple times, and I would get it out and grunt. He'd be like, why are you doing it so loud? I'm like, loud? Like, and I didn't feel like I was being loud. And then one thing that like the video viewers should see it, but the audio listeners, you're completely cupping your hands around the end of it.
Like sealing it off. So
sealing it off.
So
at the end.
I'll do the difference of like for the audio listeners and video listeners, you can kind of hear it with the microphone right here next to me. But like I'll do 2 grunts with it closed, like sealed off, and then I'll do 2 where it's like partly open, and I mean just barely open down the bottom, and you can hear the difference of it. And really, it's like again that super calm morning, gray light, and there's no wind or very, very light winds. It's like just cup that sucker and blow. Because like you could have a deer 100 yards from you, 150 yards, and then you can hear that and then come in. Versus, maybe a little bit later in the morning, the wind picks up, maybe open it up just a little bit to get a little more volume, but still not like an excess amount of volume. Like I'm talking like 30, 40% overall volume. I mean, just like, again, calling the turkeys, like what we talked about in the springtime, like just real quiet. So anyways, I'll do 2 cupped and then 2 slightly open so you can hear the difference. So kind of there's the difference between kind of cupping it versus, kind of opening it up. And then also like when you cup it, I feel like, especially like with a call like this, like a wooden call, it reverbs a lot through the call itself. And it's not like the plastic, like, because I've ran plastic grunt calls in the past and some of them are like super, super high pitch. Some of them are a little bit deeper. But like with the wood, I feel like the wood just is like a really good job of kind of resonating that sound. But anyways, it's super, super effective. And again, I don't want to go anywhere without a grunt call, in my bag at all times. So, which is great because I lost my last one. So
Just in time.
I was looking for it the last couple of days. I'm like, I don't know where it is. So I'm glad these came in because now I got me another one again put in the bag.
So last question on it. When you did the little calling demonstration earlier, is that the cadence that you're typically doing? Like when you killed the bucks last year, what was your cadence?
like this. That exact same thing.
And how many times did you grunt like that many times, or did you grunt like 20 times?
6 to on the lower side, like 6. But I think when I killed that first buck, no, actually it was second buck, probably 11, 12, something like that.
Okay.
But like I was again turning in the tree, like I wasn't just doing it in one direction. I was like doing it and kind of moving, like kind of in my saddle, kind of moving around.
Yeah.
Grunting. And one thing Richard talked about specifically with grunting like that is when you're moving the tree, and you can hear it. Like if you have your buddy and he's 60, 80 yards from you, and he's grunting towards you and then slowly turns around the tree, it sounds like that deer is moving off a different direction.
Yeah.
And that's kind of part of the reason why Richard was mentioning like moving it, like spinning around in your tree, either your tree stand or a saddle, whatever, and grunting in different directions. So it sounds like that deer's actually moving. Like if he's hearing that at 150 yards, 200 yards, it's like he can hear it real good, and all of a sudden it gets a little more muffled, like it's kind of moving off, which could potentially invoke more curiosity. Like, let me go over there and check it out instead of just grunting in one direction.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to draw it back to the turkey example again, like this spring, that last bird that I killed, if listeners weren't listening in the spring, I was calling to that turkey on a pot call, and I was calling so quiet that I felt like if I had been 50 yards away, I wouldn't have really been able to hear it. And that bird hammered it from 150 and came in. And it just goes to show, kind of like Dr. Miller was saying on the podcast the other day about deer, that those animals are designed to hear that frequency. Like that is what their ears are made for, so they can hear it from a further distance than we can. And a grunt call is the exact same way with the deer, so you don't necessarily have to get on it and like really blow the reeds out of that thing. There's cases where you might want to do that, but most of the time, like what you're talking about, you want to be really, really quiet. So I'm gonna try it again this year. Maybe it'll work.
Yeah, but like I'm telling you, like any time you're around, where I've had the most success is around thick cover where the deer can't see. Like you can see into it, like again, like a 2-year-old clear cut. You can see down into it fine. Like you could shoot a deer pretty much anywhere in it. But if you get on a deer's level in it, the deer can't see very far in front of its face. Had a lot of success there. And then also like those thicker woods, like the thicker pines, where that buck, he can't see up to where you're at, and he's got to come all the way in order to investigate. If you're sitting like on a food plot or something, and he can pop out, like if you're gun hunting, it really doesn't matter. If he pops out 150 yards, you can shoot him. But if you're bow hunting and he pops out 100 yards and he can see all the way to you, you got a problem.
Yeah.
So like just think about that, and you're like yourself. And it goes back to Tim Knight, who's also a guy who he loves the rattle and grunt from Georgia. And he talks about that, like having that security cover, good cover around you, where like a deer, he's got to come all the way in order to see what was there and give you an opportunity, specifically bow hunting wise.
Yep.
So anyway,
That's
but
like-
new Southern Outdoorsman grunts available on our website right now. So you go check those out. There's a limited edition. I think there's because we took 2 of them. There's 48 of them. So
Yep.
come get them while you can. And also maybe we ought to do this little competition. Whoever kills the first deer with one of these grunts and sends us a photo with a deer and this grunt call.
Yep.
I just thought about that. We need to figure out something we can give them. Maybe get you like a Southern Outdoorsman hoodie and some hats or something.
Oh yeah, there we go. I like that.
Yeah,
I like that.
But anyways, yeah, go check it out. Again, really love this grunt call. Super easy to use, and doesn't take a lot of airflow at all to get the call to break over exactly how you want
It's
it.
the easiest call you're ever going to run.
Yeah.
I'll say that. It is. It really is. What were you saying, Thomas?
I was saying, perfect example of using the tending grunts last year when I shot that Alabama buck. And you mentioned that the probably a 2.5-year-old clear cut. I was hunting that during gun season, and I did tending grunts. There was probably 10 to 12 of them in a big circle. And probably 15 minutes later, I had a buck come out of the pines, heading towards the clear cut. And I kept grunting, and he wouldn't budge, but I could hear him down in the bottom. and I did a couple more tending grunts and a snort wheeze, and he can't see in that clear cut up above him. And I had a little spike probably an hour later in the clear cut, so I mean it was perfect, and he worked his way up. But that's exactly how I called him in last year.
And how close was that deer when you shot him?
I mean, bow range, probably 15 yards.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like even during gun season, gun season for a lot of us in the Southeast is during the rut. You can still set up in those tight spots where like I want to be able to kind of see through some of that thick cover, but you're set up around a lot of thick cover. So like you could have a very good chance. Kind of like me and my second buck I killed last year. He came to 6 yards. I had a rifle in my hand. Wasn't expecting that. Like I knew that trail was there, but I was thinking that he was going to come out maybe 100+ yards down. But he came to 6 yards, and the next day, the next buck came to 6, down that same trail to like 10, 12 yards. But it's just super effective if you have a grunt call that you learn to use, you build some confidence with it, that you're not scaring deer, and you go out there and you understand when to implement it. Because that's something I've got a lot more confidence in. I'm going to start applying it even more so. And even early season, like I think there's a really good chance, like if you get in a spot close to like some feed sign, and there's a lot of buck sign in that general area, and you're close to potential cover where you think that buck's bedded at, and you do not a bunch of grunts. Like I'm not doing 10, 12 grunts, anything like that, but 3 or 4 of those soft little contact grunts. I think you can actually potentially get that deer to get up on his feet and kind of come and investigate, especially if there's already some sign there telling you that, hey, there's a buck here. He's laying down a good bit of sign, and I'm on whatever that good food source is, very close to that bedding location.
Yeah. And
we just had a listener, not grunt, but in Alabama, he rattled in a hammer in Alabama.
Yep.
And killed that deer. And that was a week and a half ago.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I mean, Thomas, you shot this buck on October 15th, opening day of bow for most of Alabama, and he's got a brow tine missing.
October 15th? Was it? No, it was the
Wednesday.
It was the second day of season.
Oh, you killed him on the second day of season?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh.
First
Second
day.
afternoon.
Yeah, second afternoon.
Oh, I thought you killed him on opening day. Oh, no, Luke shot one on opening day. You shot him on the next day. Got it. Okay, I got y'all mixed up. But still, October 16th, same difference. And his brow tine's busted off. So he been doing a little lollygagging.
And we'll get into the story, but obviously he had a running buddy with him. So I don't know. I'm sure they were doing a little sparring. And yesterday on one of our Moultrie cameras, we had 2 bucks sparring as well. So they're getting a little
frisky.
And
And laying down a bunch of signs too.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So let's talk about this. This is a tale as old as the podcast, where me and Jacob were talking on the podcast about how Jacob went and found all this awesome stuff, and we went there and didn't see anything, and Jacob went somewhere else and shot a buck. So
Jacob went somewhere else.
Thomas. Dang it, Thomas went somewhere else and shot a buck. So it seems like this happens every year. I'm starting to see a pattern emerge here. So we're going to talk a little crap today. It's going to be fun. All right. So y'all have been talking about going to all these different areas and scout, and Jacob's talking about finding all these rubs and scrapes and an insane feed sign and this and that. And then second day of season, you went somewhere completely new, right?
Mm-hmm. And before we get into that, I was so happy when y'all invited me back on the podcast because I've listened to the last 2 outros, last 2 Thursday outros, and obviously Jacob, I've been with him probably the last 2-3 weeks scouting. And a lot of these spots that we've been going to, I've been saying, let's go to this spot. Let's go scout this. This is a spot I went last year, found a lot of bucks on. And I've never heard so much crap talk about their youngest brother that's not even there to defend himself.
Dude.
Anyways, I just want to mention that.
Do you call that big brother syndrome?
Yeah, it's the biggest brother syndrome you could ever see is with this redhead right here to my left.
So explain that. What is big brother syndrome?
It's just, especially so I'm the youngest of 4, Jacob's the oldest. And I'm sure a lot of the listeners out there can relate to this. If you have an older brother, they always, as a baby little brother, I got to walk him through the woods with his hands, bringing toilet paper, blah, blah, blah.
Hey, that happened.
That did happen.
Yeah, Thomas about pooped himself during turkey season, and I came clutch prepared.
I'll give him that. But I don't know. You just get it. It's in the words, big brother syndrome. He's
got to look out for little brother.
got to look out for little brother.
Okay. All right. So how did this all start? So Thomas, these are all your spots?
No.
If you really think about it,
so Thomas's spots originally, he's like, man, we're going to go in and go look at these pines. There was scrapes down the logging road. I'm thinking in the back of my mind, those scrapes ain't going to be there for another 2
okay,
months.
let's stop. When was the last time you went into any of these spots? As far as time, like how many years do you think the last time you went in there?
The first place we went to, I don't know if I've ever been in that area.
I think I was there last year. That's all I'm saying.
This is already everything I hoped it would be.
Okay.
Hey, listen. When we went in there, I was the one to find the majority of the sign. Tom was like,
Look, yeah, I mean, you heard him on here. He was like, "Well, Thomas's feet were hurting, so
we
he
need to
didn't
go
want
back to the truck. It was almost dark.
Yeah. Dude, listen, you got phone, you got flashlight on your phone. Where keep scouting, my man. Yeah, no, there's a couple times he got a little tired, so he's like, all right.
He's like, well, Thomas, he
and
didn't want to walk up this other hill.
And then obviously Andrew, that's all you hear is him talking. And then you were like, "Oh my gosh, we gotta get Thomas."
Oh yeah, I was getting concerned. I was like,
know.
Thomas has gotten soft on us.
I
No,
know.
he did.
And it was the complete opposite.
No, but see, listen, this is the thing about me when we go scouting. And Thomas has realized this. I think Thomas is more point A to point B. I'm the wanderer. Okay, so we go to the specific spot, and I'm
Dude,
like,
Jake,
I'm gonna
hey,
let you finish. I'm gonna let you finish.
But how much like we'd start walking away? I'm like, no, let's go this way. You're like, what are you doing? Like, why? Like, and then like you start getting back on sign. And it's like just kind of letting the lay of the land kind of tell you where you need
Look,
to go.
I said it a couple weeks ago. Jacob scouts like he lives his life. Zero preparation for anything.
Yeah.
Just goes and wanders.
And the
That's what
thing,
you
and
gotta do.
so obviously, so I'm scouting with Jacob a lot. So I'm in the woods with him, and obviously I'm listening to the podcast too. But when we're scouting in the woods, it's like we're having a full podcast as he's walking, like pointing out this and this, which I love because it actually helps me a lot. But I'm like, all right, let's keep moving. We stopped there for like 10 minutes just looking at the same deer poop. And then I'm like, we got to keep moving. We got to keep
No,
moving.
well, see, yeah, because Thomas is like in a rush to always go someplace, and I'm very much. He's like you, Andrew. Andrew's like that too. Andrew's like
Speed
Dude, I
scouter.
go.
And,
Speed
I,
scouter.
and I'm like, you get in an area, and then I like to get in the area, like once you start finding a sign, like just stand there for a little bit and like just overanalyze. Well, how the deer coming in here? Like how do the trails, especially after doing that scouting video with Bobby, how the trails line up, feed trees, just glass up in some oaks, kind of look at that. Tom was like, nope, let's keep going. Which is there's a good bounce between the two, but it's like that's where me and him differ because he's like very much like go check an area real quick and then run back out. And I kind of get in there and split off from him. And I'm like, hey, I'm just gonna go up in this next ridge and just like walk this down, or I'm gonna like let's go walk this creek bottom out instead of like taking like the easiest route back up to the truck. And by doing that, the more time you spend out there, if you're covering ground, because I think you can be a very effective speed scouter, but you have to like intentionally put yourself in spots that are going to have deer, not just like walk the shortest route going into an area and then coming out the same way. So,
But we did find some good stuff so far.
oh
this
yeah,
year.
no, we found some great stuff. But going back to it, we ended up finding all this great sign, and I was super confident the first week of postseason. I'm like, I'm going to kill a buck here. And you ended up not even hunting in that general area. You hunted kind of across a different spot opening day that we hung one of the mole trees in.
Yep.
Found a couple different scrapes, some big rubs or Thomas found a couple big scrapes, a couple big rubs in this creek drainage or this SMZ, this ditch that ran between this clear cut. And we found a tree in there that I was like, dude, this tree looks awesome. But you ended up hunting there, seeing some deer, but then you ended up bouncing to a completely different area. Like an area, I told you, like, I haven't been in there in that general area in probably 6 years, probably. And you're like, I'm just going to go on a random walkabout because you were mentioning something. There was a certain ridge point or something that like, caught your attention. Like you're just looking at the maps, like that looks really good for some reason.
Yeah. So going to open today, I did sit that where the mole tree was. Ended up seeing 4 deer. But it was opening week. We had that cold front come in, north wind, and like you mentioned on the last couple outros, the north wind was not good really for any of those spots that we scouted. So I was just like, well, a lot of people in this area have been mentioning, oaks, and we need to find hardwoods that are dropping. And we did find some in the area we have been scouting, but it's set up for a south wind, southeast wind.
That, but also I think something we didn't realize afterwards, there is no water in that
At all.
that creek system, which is weird because we're finding much of the sign and we get deer on camera, but I'm like, I don't know where the water's at. I think I might have an idea, but it's like really far away and it's kind of like, I don't know, kind of weird to get to. But there's no good water source there. So I was thinking like as dry as it's been, and kind of, I don't know if that was in your mind, but it's like trying to bounce other creek systems that might have water because everything in there is bone dry. Like there's no pools of water. There's no even mud. It is dry dirt and rocks down in that drainage.
Yeah, and I agree. And finding water and oaks that are dropping was like the key. And really, the reason why I picked that spot, I was just looking on the maps one night. I think it was after I hunted opener afternoon, and I was just looking on the maps, and I saw that creek system that runs through those hardwoods, and there's a lot of ditches that come off of that creek, but also you have a big ridge that comes down. And Andrew, you know this spot probably better than both of us, but you have a ridge that comes down and kind of jets off to both sides of this creek. It just looked good on the map, to be honest with you. And I was like, I'm just going to go in there in the afternoon and set up.
Which you ended up, I think, where I was, I don't know if I hunted that. No, I did hunt that afternoon because that was my first because I couldn't go opening day. And you texted me. I think we were doing a podcast that day. We were doing an outro, and you're like, "Hey, I'm going out there at 11 o'clock to like walk in and get set up or something like that." I'm like, "Okay, that's fine." Like, because we get done here, and we had probably 3-4 hours before dark, and went and got set up. And I ended up seeing a spike that afternoon. But you worked in there. How long did it take you to get in that area and get set up?
Yeah, so I got out there at 12:30ish. And it's probably a mile back in there that the way I weaved along the creek, but it took me an hour and 45 minutes to get back there because I was slipping through and looking at the oaks along that creek to see when I could find some feeding sign or buck sign. And so it took me a long time, but I think that was one of the biggest keys in how I was able to slip in there, because it turns out later in the hunt, those deer come from the direction I walked in from almost. So I was probably going 15 yards every, 5-10 minutes, just slipping through. But I actually want to get Andrew's perspective on this place first, because I know, Andrew, talking to you for a little bit before I went in there, you've been in there previously when you used to hunt.
Oh yeah,
out there a lot
when he was hunting with the pours on public, not on that privileged private land, or pours on public, not on this privileged private land. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, so
man, you fumbled it.
Yeah, whatever.
Fumbled.
But as far as your perspective in there, because you told me, when I was about to go out there, hey, there's this right here, there's good hardwoods, blah blah blah.
Yeah,
but.
Yeah, that area was always good in the early season, and there would always be a lot of buck sign down in those bottoms in there. One thing about the place is it's like a pretty big patch of hardwoods. It's not your typical SMZ where it's a little tight, skinny area. There's actually a decent bit of hardwoods in here that go up onto the hills, and I always like to see that. And looking back, we just like back when I was hunting that area, that was like really early in my hunting,
Career.
And I hate to say that, but back then, like I don't even know if we were paying attention to wind or anything like that. I do remember one time I brought where that big bend in the creek is. I brought a smoke bomb in there and set it off to see what the wind did right there. And that's like right when I was like learning about wind and everything. Yeah. But I found a bunch of sheds in there. I found a bunch of really good sheds in there. Had a bunch of big deer on camera. And actually where you killed that buck, I've killed 2 deer almost in that exact same spot on that exact same trail that you killed your bucks on.
Yeah.
And I just quit hunting it like years ago. But no, that's actually a really good area. Especially, I feel like it's good opening week, and then it kind of diminishes over time.
Yeah.
When people start hunting it, so I think you hit it like perfect.
Yep.
Honestly.
And right where that, to kind of go back a little bit, where you said that that creek bends right there. There are like 2 massive deer trails that cut that bend.
Oh,
and there's
yeah.
those 2 big white oaks on the, what is that?
So that's where I killed those 2 deer.
Okay.
So I killed them a little bit sooner from where you because I know you went past that, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But those white oaks right there, I was about to set up there, and I was like, it was only like 1:30, something like that. I was like, I'm just going to keep going, keep getting a little further back to that point. But yeah.
Well, okay. Well, listen, you got to be more descriptive. So, walking in, you're scouting.
Okay, yeah.
Trying to find feed sign. What were you originally looking for?
So when I first peeled off where I parked that, and I got down to the creek, my main goal was just to find white oaks. That I watched a video this morning because previously I've not been very good at telling the difference between a white oak and a red oak, and this and that. So I watched a video that day going out there to try to educate myself a little bit better when I was walking.
Was that Jonathan Bone's video, Catman?
Yeah, great video. By the way.
Yeah. Our buddy Jonathan Bone, Catman Outdoors. He's got a excellent video on YouTube showcasing pretty much every species of oak that we have in the Southeast and what they look like, from acorns to leaves to bark. So really good one. Y'all need to go check that out on his channel. But I think you said you were watching that one, right?
Yeah, that's the one I watched. And so when I went out there, as soon as I got down to the creek bottom and I was working my way back to this area, all I was really trying to pay attention to was obviously feed sign and find the oaks that are dropping heavy and whatever like deer tracks, because still even now I didn't find any fresh buck sign throughout that whole piece that I walked. And even when we walked out there the next day, we found like maybe one or two whipper rubs through that whole piece that we walked. But once I got down the creek and started working my way down and around, it was really just taking my time and trying to find the oaks, like I said. But
Did you end up finding some? I mean, you said you walked by some, but
yeah,
was there feed sign? Were they dropping acorns and feed sign?
There was. So in that bend in the creek, there's two big white oaks were dropping. There was feed sign under it, tilled up. You could see where they were popping the acorn caps. And those were two white oaks. And that was kind of like that sign was throughout that whole north side of that creek until I sat up. So there was feed sign all on that steep ridge that runs down to that point down below, was all feed sign. And once I got to the general area where I sat, I actually jumped two does closer to that point to the north where the buck ran after I shot him. But right where I sat was 3 or 4 big white oaks that were dropping acorns, and I sat just above them to where my wind was blowing back down the creek where I came in from. And that allowed me to where I was really imagining deer to come from the north off that creek where you had that creek crossing, I believe.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But whenever I got sat up, it was probably only sat up at 2 o'clock, 2:15, and at 2:30 I had a doe and 2 fawns come from the north feeding on those white oaks and make their way back up the hill to the south. But it was really just the feed sign is, I think, the biggest thing.
So
on that.
no buck sign. I mean, old sign, old rubs.
Old rubs.
But no fresh whip rubs or anything like that you found on the way in. And so one thing, would you shoot a doe with a bow?
I've had so many opportunities to shoot does with a bow and I haven't.
Doesn't care.
Wow. What an elitist.
Never kill a deer with a bow. And he's like, I'm just not going to shoot one. He shot a couple with a crossbow in the past, right?
Yeah.
Have you killed a buck with a crossbow?
Yeah. Those little Arkansas bucks.
Okay, gotcha. So, and I know you killed your bear with it as well. So this is like kind of first go at it. And that's why it's kind of funny because you don't care anything about shooting a doe. I'm like, dude, I almost shot a doe 2 days ago with Andrew or with Thomas way back at a spot. And he told me before do not shoot a doe. And then I had these 2 does come out. I'm like, no, I'm shooting one. It just so happened.
Get them flat first.
A squirrel scared the.
We were so far back in there.
Yeah.
It had to come up a giant hill, and I told Jacob, like he said, do not shoot a doe. I know you're going to want to shoot a doe. Do not shoot a doe. Because I told him we were going to see a doe. Like, I know we're going to see some deer. I was worried. Because those does that you saw walk past me at 15, 20 yards, I got to smoke both of them. And I was like, these deer are going to go right by Jacob. And I text him, deer coming towards you. I didn't say don't shoot them.
Do not shoot.
Yeah.
Do not shoot off limits. But anyways, going back to the hunt. So you ended up finding a tree that you ended up getting in, again, just above the white oaks, which I thought was an interesting move because my thought would have been getting a little bit closer to the creek. Because like those big white oaks, they're all 25 yards from the creek, maybe, something like that.
Yep.
But you got set up above them, climbed a tree, had the doe and the 2 fawns come by. What time did ended up being bucks come by?
So that was 2:30. They came out at probably 4:30, 4:40.
A couple hours before dark.
Yep. I mean, well before dark.
Yeah, like 2 hours, right?
Yeah.
I remember because you called me, and I was hunting that afternoon, and I couldn't answer because I had deer moving too, but they were in this little pine thicket.
Yeah.
So I wonder if they just moved at like 4:30 that day.
And that was the
Hey, guess what?
coldest.
That was the underfoot time.
Yeah, whatever.
One of the major feed times. Anyways, keep going.
But that was the coldest day too of that cold front was Thursday. So like when I was sitting up there at 4:30, it was probably already low 50s, maybe mid 50s. So I mean that might have got them up sooner too. But they came the direction I walked in from. And I heard him walk, and I turn over my right shoulder, and I look, and I see his rack. I'm like, oh, no way. No way. And I'm like, oh, buck. So I grab my bow, and then I look behind him. There's another buck. I'm like, oh, my gosh, there's a bachelor group. This is going to be awesome. I was really thought there was the next one behind him was going to be like just a giant, which there wasn't another one. But anyways, I turned around.
That you knew of.
That I knew of. And then, I keep going after that. But so they're working. They were probably already at 30 yards behind me coming off that hillside. And I turn around. And
they came off the ridge?
I mean, yeah.
Oh,
angle.
I thought they came up the creek bottom. Okay, interesting.
No, they came, diagonal down the ridge.
Okay.
Right where the does and the fawns went up.
I know where I'm hunting tomorrow.
Yeah, you can go back in there.
No, keep going.
And when I first seen them, they were at 30 yards, and I had a shot, right off the rip on the first one, the one that I actually shot at probably 20 yards, 25 yards, and I just waited because I couldn't tell what the one behind him was yet, and I was really hoping a little drop time buck or something step out. But anyways, they work and they're feeding on those big white oaks that I was set up on, but they came from behind, and they get to about 20 yards exact walking down this trail, and I draw, and there was a few little limbs in my way.
How big was the second deer?
Second deer was same frame as this one, but his tine length was not as long. And he was actually, I think he was a 9-point as well, the second deer, but he had the extra, his G4 on his left side compared to this one, because I thought this one was just an 8 when I first saw him. But
so the other one was a 10-point, but he had shorter tines.
It could have been a 10-point, but shorter tines.
Pull him down a little bit and turn him. Yeah, side pro. There you go.
Yeah, man, that's a great deer. So all right, so they come in and he's at 20 yards. You got some limbs in the way.
Yeah, some limbs in the way, and at where I'm at, I'm probably 18 feet up in this tree, but I'm above elevation of them. So I have a lot more tree limb cover between me and him, and where they're walking to, I didn't know how many more gaps I would have to shoot them. So I draw, and there was maybe one or two limbs, but small limbs in between us, but not over his vitals really. And I draw back and I shoot, and the arrow placement looks great. Like when it hits him, it looks like it was perfect, but when it hit him, I could still see some part of the arrow hanging out still. I didn't hear like a shoulder bone hit like people talk about, but it just didn't look like it had as much penetration as a full pass through. Mm-hmm. So I hit him. He runs north probably 30 yards and stops and just is looking like, and I'm like, what just happened? Very confused. So I grab another arrow, put another arrow, and draw back. And at this point, he's probably 55, 60 yards away through some heavy stuff I'm about to shoot through. And I draw back, and I could see him fine, but there's some stuff, and I shoot and couldn't tell if I hit him the second time. And at this point, the second buck is still standing there at like 25 yards, just like, what just happened? Like it's so early in the season, has no idea. And he finally blows and runs up the hill back where he came. And after I shot the second time, he just tears out of there and goes right over this that ridge that comes down. He goes over that crest, and I don't see him anymore. And at this point, I'm pumped up. I'm fist pumping. I was like, I wish I could call you, but you didn't have signal where you were at. And then it hits me. I'm like, did I actually just kill him, or what happened? Because when I shot him, he ran 30 yards and stopped. And he kind of looked like he was fine. Like it wasn't like he was wobbling over or nothing like that. And I was like, I was second guessing myself at that point.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, my gut kind of drops. I'm like, And I'm looking, trying to see if my arrow like fell off where he ran. I couldn't see it. And I waited 5 minutes probably. And I get down just to see if I could find blood or my arrow at the shot. I climbed down, all my stuff's still in the tree, walk down, I look. And as I'm walking down to the arrow, I actually see a deer where he ran to run off. I'm like, I think that's him. but I didn't want to think that was him. So I went down to the shot. I couldn't find my arrow. Couldn't find a drop of blood where I shot him at. I was like, dude, I think I just missed him completely, or just no idea what happened. And I stopped, go back to the tree. I just sit there probably for 15 minutes. I'm like, I'm going to go to the second shot to where I shot to try to find that arrow, which was probably 55, 60 yards. So I get down and I'm walking the trail that I think he ran on to that second shot. And I'm looking and cannot find any blood. Couldn't find my second arrow. And at this point, I'm like, dude, I think this buck just got away. It kind of sucked at that point. And I was about to call you, Andrew, but I was like, let me just, since I couldn't find any blood yet, I'm just going to keep going up that, where that ridge comes down, where he crest at, to just try to see if I can find anything. And I walk, and I finally find an arrow laying on the ground right where that crest is, where I saw him crest over the hill. And I pick it up, and there was some blood on the ground, not much, but there was some blood splatter. And on the arrow, there's probably only 4 inches, 5 inches of blood on it. And I was like, and as soon as that happened, I tried to call you, and you had some deer around.
At that, yeah. So I had just gotten set up that afternoon, and you called me, and I'd only been set up for like 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, and I was set up next to this pine thicket, and there's some blue jays cutting up in there, and I thought I could hear something walking, so I didn't answer, and I just let it ring, and then as soon as, because I'm like, if you're calling me at 4:30, I'm like, yeah, he probably shot something, because I knew you were hunting. And so when it went to voicemail, I texted you. I was like, hey, can't answer. I think I got deer close, but did you shoot one or something like that? And yeah, then you started sending me everything, and I was like, oh, it doesn't sound that great.
Yeah, and it was where the arrow was, what I measured on Onyx. It was like 70, 80 yards from where I shot him at. So I find the arrow with 4 or 5 inches of blood on it. 70, 80 yards from where I first shot him out, and then I see some blood on the ground. But at that point, I was like, I got to back out. And that's why I asked you. I was like, I'm going to back out, but I just want to double check what you think first. And you were like, yeah, just back out. So I don't go any further. Don't look for any more blood. I'll take a picture of the arrow, and I'll leave.
Yeah, I remember now, because you texted me. I was like, hey, what happened? And you sent me 3 or 4 texts of like, I got 4 to 6 inches of penetration. I think I might have hit him in the shoulder, like very little blood. And like, I'm sitting there looking at my phone, and like these texts are coming through, and as they're coming through, I'm typing out, back out now.
Yeah.
I was like, do not take another step down that trail.
Yeah.
So yeah. And then I call you after I get done with my hunt. I call you as I'm walking back to the truck and get like the full story on it. And you kind of explain everything. I was like, dude, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I was very confused as to what happened, because there was like a lot of things that seemed like were conflicting. Because at first you were saying like, oh, it looked really good. I feel like I had penetration, but then when I found the arrow, there was only a couple inches.
Yeah.
Is it enough? And you sent me a picture of the arrow, and it's like painted up, probably 4 or 5 inches. And you're like, is that enough to kill the deer? I'm like, I mean, it can be for sure. It's not ideal. And I'm like, I just didn't know if you just missed with this first shot or the second. Like, I didn't know what was going on. Yeah. And at that point, I'm thinking, like, maybe you one-lunged him. Maybe you hit shoulder, and you're shooting a big mechanical broadhead. So I'm like, maybe he just hit him in the scapula, and it punched through, but he just didn't get great penetration, but you got one lung. Mm-hmm. And then at that point, I'm like, I don't really know what I would do in that situation. Maybe call Jacob, see if he wants to go out with you at, like, midnight and like, see if y'all could jump it. And because like sometimes with a one lung deer, if you jump it and you reopen that wound, it'll end up dying pretty quick. So I was just like, dude, I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, and the weird thing was that arrow that had, I mean, it was painted up really good on the front end, but you were like, there's also blood on the fletching.
Yep.
But like a spatter of blood, not like it was painted or anything, but like blood had spattered on it. I was like, okay, now that's weird.
Yep.
Now I'm like, I really don't know.
Yeah, it was so weird.
And because I didn't have cell signal while I was hunting, so I got up to the top of this ridge coming out of this hellhole, and I'm like, beep, beep, like my phone's going off like crazy because I'm getting all these text messages from 2.5, 3 hours ago that you shot one. It's this whole thing, but I thought you shoulder hit it, and I ended up calling you when I got back and got better signal. And when you told me there was blood on the fletching, like splatter of blood, the first thing that came to my mind is like, in order for that to happen, in my opinion, like you got to hit some kind of artery or something that's got pressure on it to blow blood out. Like if you shoulder, because I have shoulder shot more deer than I care to imagine. Okay, especially like early on bow hunting and just taking not terrible shots, but I was holding too high on the deer. The deer would drop and just smoke a shoulder, and like I never got 4 or 5 inches of penetration. It was like hit the shoulder, inch and like broadhead would barely go into the shoulder. Broadhead would come out, there'd be no blood on it. So you said there's blood on the fletching. I'm like, you had to hit there was some kind of artery or something you had to hit in order for that pressure to blow that blood out. Was my thought, especially after like track some deer with pepper. And we ended up. I called you later. We talked about it. I'm like, well, let's go look for it in the morning. Like, I'll bring pepper. We'll put pepper in the truck. But, like, you and me, let's go out there first before we put pepper on the ground. Let's actually try to, like, find more blood and get, like, a better path of travel. And if we lose blood, we'll get the dog out, and then we'll just run it. And we ended up meeting up out there, got into the spot, and you walked me into the area, kind of like where you shot the deer. And, of course, there's no blood right there, but we ended up walking out to where the arrow was that fell out of the deer. And on the way to the deer, I was kind of like off the trail from you of like where the deer had run. And I didn't go 40 yards and I started finding blood and like blood that you hadn't found.
Yeah.
And on a different trail. And it's like going up the ridge. Like I'm like, we're walking down the creek and you're walking straight and this blood trail is going up the ridge. I'm like, this is kind of weird. And I start following it while you're walking to the arrow and I find blood all the way up to about 10 yards above where the arrow was, and then the deer cut and went right back down. It's like good blood the whole time, like really good blood. And I'm like, this is kind of interesting. Like I've never, like, again, I've shoulder shot some deer. I've brisket shot deer on accident. Like I've had all that happen as a newer bow hunter, 10, 12 years ago, or actually longer than that. And I've never had blood like that from one of those hits. So I follow it. You get to the arrow. I kind of follow the blood trail to the arrow. Arrow falls out. Looking at it, I'm like, if this is truly a shoulder hit deer, this is more blood than I've ever seen from a shoulder hit deer. Mm-hmm. And we end up finding that and then start tracking it. And I mean, there was a big pool of blood right above where the arrow fell out at, like a big, probably 10 inches in diameter blood pool right there. And it's got there's bubbles all in it and everything.
Is that where the deer stopped and you took the second shot, you think?
No, this is way further. This is that 70, 80 yards from where he shot the deer even the second time.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So this is still within, like, 75, 80 yards from where the initial shot was.
Real quick, too, by the way, before we get too far down this rabbit hole, the decision to wait overnight, was that what were you thinking? I mean, were you thinking it was definitely like shoulder, one lung?
I was going off what he said, and I'm like, even if it's shoulder or one lung, like I don't want to push it tonight in the dark, and especially if the blood's not super great, and run it with pepper. Like, I'd rather wait in the morning. Let's go double check and see how the blood looks, and then if we need to put the dog out, we put the dog out. But like Tom's always your friend.
And this is the night where it was like 35 degrees.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing I talked to you about, Thomas. I'm like, if he's dead now, he'll be dead in the morning. And it's plenty cold to leave him.
Yep.
So yeah. Anyways.
So like that was my thought. I'm like, to me, when it comes to tracking deer, Tom's always your friend. Like you do way more damage, and because I've tracked deer for guys with pepper who we tracked it too soon and we jumped the deer up and the deer was not mortally wounded, or it might have been, but like we ran the track too long and then like we need to pull out and the deer died, quarter mile from there.
Yeah.
Later on. So Tom's always your friend. I feel like when you're tracking a deer, like the more time you can give it, the better off, especially like a gut hit deer. You hit a deer far back, like you give it plenty of time. Like it's always better more time than not enough time. But anyways, we find blood, we get to the arrow, and like when I was tracking him, I'm tracking him going up the ridge, like he's side hill going up, and then Thomas is 10 yards below me, and then all of a sudden the deer stops and cuts straight down to where Thomas was. When he went downhill, the blood, like it wasn't as heavy, it was just kind of a little splattering. But to that point, like literally, you didn't even have to hunt, like you're just walking, it's just blood going down the trail.
And this is blood you missed yesterday.
Yeah.
Like, was this past the point that you stopped at yesterday?
So since he went up a little bit past where I thought he was walking, so like he went up this way and I was walking this way and the arrow was over here and then he came down. I didn't ever go up that.
He walked past it. He was parallel in the blood trail. The deer ended up going higher in elevation. He thought it ran right down the bottom. So he was like lower than where the deer actually took, which happened. So this is what I was going to bring up just as a lesson for everybody, Thomas, myself, everybody here, but also all the listeners and viewers out there. There are so many times you'll shoot a deer, because this happened to me in North Carolina. You shoot a deer, And like in North Carolina, I had a full pasture. It took us 30 minutes to find blood because we were 5 yards higher up on the ridge
Than the deer was.
than where the deer was. And we couldn't find blood. Ended up when we dropped down, there's great blood. We just couldn't. It was super overcast, shade. Like you couldn't see blood all that good until you got on it. Then you could see the blood. It was fine. It was a great shot. But it's like that to me. That happens all the time. Someone will shoot something, and they don't really have a great idea where the deer was at or where the deer ran.
Yep.
And they're just off. They could be off the trail 10 yards and never find blood. But if they would have actually done some really small little semicircles, that's how I found the blood, doing the little small semicircle, the circles going around, 10-yard little circles until I found blood and then hit the blood and ran the blood out. So that's just like a piece of advice there. Like if you don't find blood, keep doing little semicircles and slowly expand your way towards where you saw the deer run until you find the blood.
Yeah.
And anyways, we get to like where Thomas had stopped, where he found the arrow and found a little bit of splattering of blood. And we look up and blood kind of stopped right there for a little bit, like just a couple of drops, but we kept following it. And the blood picked right back up, and we just keep running as the deer drops down in elevation a little bit, runs that like 50 yards off the creek. And we're just following the blood, and blood's good. Blood's real good. And
What are you thinking at this point?
I'm like, dude, this deer's dead. Like, there is no way. Like, this is not a like. I'm thinking, if this is the shoulder shot deer, this is the best shoulder shot I've ever seen on a deer. Like the most blood I've ever seen on a shoulder hit deer. I'm like, I didn't tell him this, but I was like, I don't think this is a shoulder hit deer. And we keep tracking, and it gets to a certain point where it's like bigger pools of blood, like where the deer had like either stopped or he stopped right there, and just blood was everywhere. And we're only like 120 yards to the track from where he originally shot it. And I look up and there's switch cane right there, on like a little patch of switch cane and this deadfall right next to the creek. And I'm like, he's probably gonna be in this thing.
Yeah.
Like he's gonna be dead right here because by the blood. I'm like, this is a lot of blood. This deer's dead. There's a ton of blood. And that's when I started getting more excited because me and Thomas were like fist bump. I'm like, dude, this deer's done. And we get up to that spot and there's like a ton of blood right there next to the switch cane. And I'm like, I don't see him. I'm like looking around. It's not a big patch, like a real small patch of switch cane. And I'm like looking, and all of a sudden, Thomas, you kind of take a step out.
Yeah, because it's right along the creek bed that runs, and I kind of stick my head up and look, and I see a deer laying there. And when I first saw him, bad, but Coyotes got to this deer that I saw, and I was like, "There's a dead deer right there, Jacob." But I don't know if that's ours because it was nothing, no meat, no nothing on this deer when I looked.
He's like, there's a dead deer in the creek that got eaten by coyotes. I'm like, no way. So I take 2 steps to the right and I look down, and it's a buck laying there,
And I was
rack
like, oh my
out
gosh.
of the water, like they shallow little sandbar, laying there with his rack out of the water, and there ain't nothing left of this deer.
So he died in the cane thicket, and they drug him down there.
So I think he died in the creek because we followed blood right there there's a big pool of blood, bunch of blood. And we ended up finding this after we get the deer out. But there's blood going off through the switch cane down to the creek right there, and then he was drug up. Like he fell in some deeper water, and he was drug up right there next to like on a little sandbar.
Yeah.
And there's coyote tracks everywhere. But we got to him, and there was literally like the only meat he had was like a little bit on his throat and his shanks. Literally everything was gone. Like everything was gone.
Dang.
And I was
In
like,
less than like 12 hours.
yeah.
If
12 hours, yeah.
A little over 12 hours.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, I was like, God. But I'm like looking at it, I'm like, dude, the deer didn't go 150 yards, I think, total. Probably like in that ballpark range. So we get down there. And of course, I'm like, what was your emotion when we found it like that?
I mean, not pleased because knowing that he was definitely dead last night for sure. He was dead probably within 5-10 minutes, 15 minutes maybe. But I mean, I was glad we found him. But it's like I was so confused on what I saw the night before, like seeing him what I thought ran after you're staying up there on that little ridge for a little bit, not finding any blood for like 40 yards. And because we backtracked where we first found blood, we'll go more into that,
we'll get into that because this is where more details come out about the shot. We get down to the deer, and the deer's just chewed. I mean, it's just chewed up. It's hide and a head. That's pretty much it, with like legs attached with no meat on them. And we get down, and again, I'm like, this is a great deer. Like, congrats. Like,
yeah, I was pumped up that we found him.
because like my first bow buck was I shot with you and my
Yeah.
brother Christopher, and I don't even remember what that deer was, a 5 point or 6
He
point or
wasn't.
something.
He wasn't much.
I mean, he was like right there. I mean, little thing, and we start looking at the deer, and all of a sudden, like we flip his head around, and he's got a broadhead hole going through the neck from one side, like and cut out the other side. And I'm like, well, you hit him in the neck for sure with like one of your shots, and then all of a sudden, he's missing the hide on the entry side.
Yeah.
But I like roll the carcass over, and there's a broadhead hole right behind. I mean, perfect behind the shoulder, like 3 inches behind the shoulder. There's a broadhead hole on the exit side,
Yeah.
like 2-inch wide broadhead hole. And I'm like, dude, I looked at Thomas. I was like, you hit him with both shots. In your first shot, you got to pass through, and somehow, or I say pass through, you got entry hole and exit hole. And somehow you saw the arrow kick out or something, and you thought you hit him in the shoulder or something. But like you didn't come close to the shoulder; it was perfect right behind the shoulder. And Thomas, you were like, "There ain't no way." I mean, because he was telling me, he's like, "There, I don't think that's." Okay. I'm like, I think you get a full pass through on the first shot. The second shot, you hit him in the neck. And I mean, deer was dead off the first shot, and I think he was probably about to die right where he stopped at.
Yeah.
And then he hit him the second time, and just
That's when he took off.
it was done. So we ended up checking the deer in, get the deer all checked in. Thomas was able to get the head off the deer. Again, there was no meat at all to salvage from it. And we start hiking up, and I'm like, first we need to go back and get your arrow because we left his arrow where he had lost blood or found blood the night before. But I'm like, I want to walk back and see if I can find your other arrow because I think your other arrow was laying over there somewhere where you shot it at. And we found his arrow, got back on the blood trail, backtracked the blood trail, found blood way closer than where even I picked up on it. Probably within 30 yards of where he shot the deer the first time. And we look over in the arrow's laying right there, completely painted.
Oh.
To past the fletching, the nog, completely painted in blood.
Wow.
And I'm like, but see, Thomas isn't shooting like any kind of lighted nogs. I'm not shooting lighted nogs. I have some. I haven't shot. I ain't shooting them this year. I might throw them on my bow. But to me, that's the advantage of having lighted nogs.
So yeah, as you can see it.
So like if the arrow falls out, you get a pass through. If the arrow sticks in the deer, whatever, like you can find that so much easier, specifically at night. It's doesn't help you at all during the daylight, really. But it was just laying there right where the deer had come through. I mean, completely painted.
It was like right where I shot him the second time, where he stood. Even though when I probably shot him the second time, it probably somehow kicked that out, and then the other one was stuck in his neck area.
Mm-hmm.
And then ran up
and died. But I was like, dude. So deer was way. Deer was hit perfect, way better hit than what he originally thought. But that's the crazy thing about bow hunting is like stuff can happen so fast, especially early season. There's so much leaf cover, and you lose visibility so fast, and it's hard to really tell. But like the shot was perfect, the original shot was perfect. I still can't believe he hit him on the second shot because. Again, you're trying to get another arrow in the deer, and there's a lot of stuff in the way, and somehow it was able to get another arrow in him. But, I mean, even before the second shot, the blood was good that we found. So, I mean, it's unfortunate. Deer was dead probably within a couple minutes. Definitely could have found it that night, but we elected to wait, and the coyotes got to it. But it's all like good lessons learned. So that kind of brings up like what are like some takeaways you learned specifically on like the shot and all that kind of stuff after the fact and like tracking.
So I told you this, which obviously I don't have that much experience shooting deer with a bow, obviously being my first one, but rushing, like I had time to really pay attention to like when I was shooting them, right before I shot them, maybe picking a little bit better lane to shoot them at. Because like I said, there was some, limbs in between us, maybe not on his vitals, but, when I shot him, it kind of threw off like, where I could see the arrow. But I probably should have waited a little bit longer or shot him sooner when he was in that wide open spot. But I was waiting on that second buck to come down. And then also obviously paying attention and staying in the stand to listen a little bit more instead of, getting too excited, getting down within 5 minutes, and going to try to find the arrow and blood on the first shot.
Well, especially I agree, especially like waiting because I think if you if you would have waited, I think you bumped him where, again, right where he went over the ridge, it probably was him, and he just ran. I mean, literally died right there. He didn't go 65 yards more from where you potentially bumped him at to where he died, maybe 70 yards. But definitely waiting and listening, and also reanalyzing, like, kind of what just happened, where he ran, and really try to get like some really good landmarks of what you thought he ran by. I think it is super helpful for everybody. Like, not only you, but me and everybody else is like really trying to analyze what just happened, where did the deer run, looking for the arrow, and then sitting in the stand for a little bit, especially if it's not about to get dark. Like, I mean, you shot him 2.5 hours before dark. So, sitting there, waiting 30, 40 minutes, get down, and then slowly work your way over there and see what you can find. It would be super helpful. Because to be honest, one of the worst things is like you gut shoot a deer, which you didn't do that, so you didn't have to worry about that. But you gut shoot one, but you don't because of the angle, you might not think it's a gut shot. Maybe the deer was slightly quartering to you. You didn't really realize it. You get one lung, liver, guts. You get down there and you find your arrow or you find gut matter or something on the ground. That is an instant. You back out. Don't even try to go track that deer for 14 hours at least, and then come back in, and then the deer should not go very far. That's one thing we've realized with like any kind of gut shot deer, and even like tracking deer with pepper. As long as you don't pressure them, they're going to run to the first spot they can lay down, typically within 100, 150, 200 yards, and they're going to lay up, and they're probably going to die right there. So just, other piece of advice.
And one thing I did do, I did take pictures on my camera, but like where I shot them the second time, where I shot them the first time, even though the first time was so close, I didn't really need the picture. But like how, you have so much limb cover in that area, like, even when I was up in the tree and I'd take a picture, I'd try to exactly see where that second shot was. And I got down, went over there. Once you're on the ground, it looks completely different.
So one thing I like to do instead of because I used to take photos too, take a video. And this is something that I try to do is video, like where you're where your saddle, like if you're in your saddle, where your tree's at, go down your tree, and then again, film directly to where that deer was at and actually point on the camera like, hey, he was right in this little spot. Because to me, the video, it's a little bit easier to see like where your tree's at in the video, and then also exactly what angle the deer was at and where he ran off to, instead of a photo. Because you take a photo, once you get on the ground, we're like, well, how was I positioned again? Because nothing looks the same when you get on the ground.
Yeah.
Versus like if you do a video, you can get a little bit better general idea, like, hey, and talking to yourself like, hey, the deer was like right in this general area. Then he ran out and he was right around whatever this bush is or this whatever the tree is, something that's some kind of landmark. And then you can watch it when you're on the ground, like, okay, he was right here next to this water. Let me walk over here. Then he ran out to this bush. Let me kind of ease my way to that bush instead of just taking photos. Because to me, talking to yourself, like talking it back through while you're doing the video, is super helpful. Just to be able to kind of rethink of or reprocess it when you're on the ground looking for that sign.
Yeah.
Yep. Hindsight is 20/20, man. I mean, it's unfortunate that coyotes got him, but I mean it happens.
Yeah.
It happens, especially like early on in bow hunting and like trying to figure it out. I mean, I was telling you earlier, if I shoot a deer with a bow, every time I shoot a deer with a bow, if I don't see it die, I'm like, oh my gosh, I immediately panic every time. It stresses me out big time. So yeah, I can relate with that for sure. I mean, and like you said, Jacob, in North Carolina this year, 10-ringed this deer, and it took them forever to find it because they couldn't find that blood because you're just a little bit off of where you thought the blood was. And that's a really good tip about doing the little semicircles and just kind of fanning out until you find the blood. But, yeah, I mean, like I said, man, it happens, but that's a hell of a first bow deer.
Yeah. Also, another thing, like, the semicircles and all that stuff I think is really effective, but also because it's something we did, and I tried not to do it, but you were like in you wanted to go to the arrow so bad, and I was trying to do the semicircles, and we just took up walking. If you walk in a straight direction, it's so like you're mentioning, like with semicircles, it is so easy for you to be just off that blood and not see that blood.
Oh yeah,
because like especially if it's not just like a bucket was dumped out of blood, it can be. It is so worth getting the general direction that deer ran to whatever landmark it was the last thing you saw him go to, and start doing circles. Start out 10, 15, 20 yards wide and slowly expand it in that general direction instead of walking in a straight line over there.
Yeah.
Because you can get over there, you can find blood, which is fine, But if you just find a little bit of blood and you kind of lose the blood, you don't know what the blood trail looked like the last 60 yards that you walked by because you missed it. Because if I found the blood last night, and I'm sure he did it too, if he would have found the blood we found that night, the night before when he shot the deer, that we found the day of, from the first spot I found blood for the 50 yards we went to where the arrow was, we would track that deer last night.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm like, the deer's, like, I don't think it's a short shot deer. Also, another thing I was going to mention, once we found the dead deer and I saw it hit in the neck, that's where I was like, that's where the second arrow was, the one that he found originally, was it. There, you get all the large blood vessels, you get your carotid artery, and just so many blood vessels right here in the neck. That's what split that
spread
that blood out onto the fletching. That's what it was, because all that super high pressure blood, all the capillaries and the arteries and stuff in the neck. So that's why I'm very confident that was the second shot, and the first shot was the one right through the right behind the shoulder.
Yeah, and the weird thing is, the thing that got me more than anything else that you said about after the shot is when you said that he ran off and then he stood there for a minute.
Yeah.
That's when I was like, that was really my biggest hang up with the whole thing, where I was like, oh, that's like never good when they do that. It's different. Like you said, sometimes they'll flick their tail, they'll kind of get wobbly, and they'll just fall over dead. And hindsight, again, being 2020, sounds like that's maybe what he was about to do, but it's just like, man, whenever I've seen a deer get shot and then run and stop and stand there, it is never good.
Yeah.
It's never. And so that was the main thing when you were talking to me on the phone that night, where I'm like, I don't know, I'd just play it safe with this one, you know, because you don't want him to, run off and not be able to find him.
Yeah. I mean, for sure. And it's one of those things that, like, to me, it's so important to, like, watch the body language of the deer when it runs off. And if it does stop there, like, pick your binos. If you have binos, Thomas doesn't have, you lose them, or they just get packed up.
We're in the middle of moving.
Yeah.
So they're packed up somewhere.
But they just bought a house, him and his wife, so they're packing stuff up. But anyways, if you can't get another arrow, look at the body language and try to see if you can see an entry exit hole. Because, like, a gut shot deer, typically you're going to see him, he's going to be all hunched up, and that tail is just going to be constantly moving back and forth. Which, again, based off the shot, you're like, it definitely wasn't a gut shot.
Yeah, and the other thing too is, I was like, when you shot him, did he fall down? Did he roll over? Did he do anything like that? Because I'm thinking with when I've hit deer in the shoulder in the past, they've like fallen over and had to get back up, or it limits their mobility somehow because you've hit the bone in that shoulder and it's messed them up.
Yep.
And like that was the other thing I asked you, and I think you said no, he didn't do anything like that.
Like I shot, I knew I hit him in a good area. It just didn't look like it had great penetration. And as soon as I hit him, he just ran, 20, 30 yards and stopped there and didn't look back. He just looked straight. He was just standing there. And then knocked another arrow and shot again, and then that's when he really busted out of there.
Yeah.
How far away was that first arrow from where you shot him the first time?
It was
The
one that was painted up.
I mean, it was probably 35 yards, maybe.
Okay.
It probably fell out right there around where the deer stopped at when he shot it the second time.
Okay. Yeah. So probably what happened is, like, you got an exit hole, but the arrow just didn't have enough oomph to, like, pass through him and stick in the dirt, and he ran off with it stuck in him.
Yeah.
And so you probably saw the fletchings poking out on the other side, and you thought you didn't get as much penetration as you did.
Yeah.
And then as he was running, it just worked its way back all the way through. So,
Yeah.
dang.
Yep. But yeah, I mean, deer's toast. But what does that do for your confidence, though, now bow hunting wise, and like setting up, going in blind and find something?
I mean, it boosted it a lot. I mean, it gets me. I mean, bow hunting in the past has kind of been a secondary thing for me, and I still love gun hunting. If it's gun season, I'm going to be using a gun, but bow season, it just makes me feel a lot more confident going out there and being able to shoot a deer, and having the ability to kill it, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Same here, man. I love gun hunting, but there's something just fun about going out in the early season.
Yeah.
Well, I'll say this: Did you get buck fever?
Yes, but I did.
You start shaking.
I was so confused.
Thomas is notorious for, convulsing shaking.
Yeah, I got it. So that's what happened. I think I was telling you, Andrew, or maybe it was Jacob. Like, I had it, but I was kind of calm buck fever before I shot, and I shoot, and then when he ran off and stopped, and I shot again, and he ran off. It just dropped. Everything just went away. Like, it was more all that fever went away because I was like, oh my God, I just messed that up. So it's kind of,
Yeah.
negative emotions.
Yeah.
Well, since this hunt, you've just stayed on the deer. You just been on them, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
I've been able to
fair.
find deer this early season. Normally, and with this piece of public that that I hunt and you guys hunt as well, typically it's kind of like how your hunts have been.
Terrible.
terrible.
Listen, I've gone twice. Andrew was bad luck on the second time. Saw deer in the first hunt.
Oh my
Went
god!
with Andrew and just settled. We shouldn't have settled.
Yep.
Oh my god!
So
Look-
typically that's how it normally is for me. I mean, like I'll see deer on this piece of land, but I've been out 4 times and I've seen 19 deer, which is like
That's crazy good.
really
That
good
is so good.
yeah.
Like seeing that many deer in the woods. Like you're not hunting any kind of agriculture or
No.
anything like that. You hunt a pine farm and you've seen that many deer. That's
Yep.
fantastic. That's really good. We've been talking it up. Jacob's spot, he found all these rubs in there, found all this crazy feed sign, this and that. And I was going to take a day and I was just going to go film him. I wasn't even going to bring my bow. I'm like, I'm just going to film Jacob shoot one. Like, this is in the bag. It's going down. And like I was telling you, Thomas, we left the parking lot and we get like 30 yards off the backside of the parking lot. And there's pretty good feed sign right there. And I'm like, I point down to it at Jacob, and he's like, like, stop. You think this is good? You just wait.
Peasant.
It was twice the feed sign that we found.
So were you
at
already
good
in the
spot.
hardwoods? Like right off that?
Yeah, because we came in from a different way.
Yeah.
And parked and dropped down into it.
Yeah.
And there was some feeds on a really big trail right there below where we dropped in from. But, I mean, again, I was expecting a lot of those white oaks to be dropping a lot more. And it's like maybe some of them had already dropped out, but I think some of them are still holding. I didn't check them all that good.
Well,
but
so the weird thing is where I'm hunting right now, the only white oaks that are dropping good are in openings. They're like on the edges of fields. Like on Cody's place, he's got a couple that he said were dropping, but they were like these giant field oaks, The ones in the woods just aren't really dropping yet. And I walked a good chunk of the hardwoods on our place, and I haven't found anything dropping very good yet. And so that's what I was kind of wondering about, because, I mean, y'all aren't hunting that far away. I'm like, are they dropping yet or what? And I think, Thomas, you said that there was, or he was saying that you said that there was like a bunch of coons up in these trees that you were hunting around.
Yeah.
So talk about that for a
And
second.
that's what I was going to mention. So not where I shot this buck, but where I hunted opening morning, you have that SMZ that runs up into the clear cut on each side. There was those 2 white oaks that you talked about on the last outro, and one of the white oaks have been dropping when I first went in there and scouted. So when I sat there that evening and I was hunting, I saw 4 deer. None of them fed under that tree, but I could hear the acorns dropping. And then, 10, 15 minutes before, sunset, I had a group of raccoons come towards that tree, climb up in it, and kind of talked about what Warren talked about, how they get up there and are they knocking them down or they're eating them up there?
yeah, they're eating
Both.
they're falling
dropping
out.
some and
Yeah.
knocking some out.
And they were just up there having a time of their lives. And that was one thing after I listened to that episode, I was like, and especially the clip you posted, I was like, oh, dude, that screams that white oak tree.
Yeah, and that's what. So where me and Jacob ended up setting up, it was actually really good feeds on it. It was 2 different white oaks, and it was very tilled up. There was fresh deer crap. There was tracks. I mean, it looked really good. But the whole time we sat there, we didn't hear a single acorn fall naturally. There were squirrels that knocked them out of the trees that we were hunting. We heard some behind us in the creek that fell, but out of those 2 trees that had all the feeds on, it was only squirrels knocking them out.
Yeah.
So they weren't really dropping good yet. And over these last couple of years in this area where I've like really been paying attention to it, it seems like it's always more like closer to Halloween before they start dropping good. Like the tree is dropping. It's not squirrels,
knocking 'em.
knocking them out or anything like that.
Which on where we hunted on Saturday afternoon, which is that new area that we kind of went into, where I sat, there was a big red oak and like a bunch of white oaks right around me, and those were all dropping with no squirrels, no nothing. There were squirrels on the ground feeding, a bunch of them, but they were they were dropping the whole afternoon. I was sitting there, and I had those 3 does come by, and they were feeding all under, especially the red oak. They really weren't on the white oak when I saw them.
Yeah. Now the spot Jacob took me to looks pretty good for like later in the year.
Yeah.
It would definitely get me excited for later in the year. It looked fantastic for that. But yeah, it was just kind of underwhelmed. We almost went back to the truck and drove somewhere else. Mm-hmm. But then we walked by that feed sign, and we were standing there and we were trying to figure out what to do. And I was like, if we went to the other spot and found this same feed sign, would you set up on it? And you kind of sat there for a second and you're like, okay, let's climb these trees.
Well, I mean, the feed sign at the other spot I know is better, and one of the white oaks was dropping really good that Sunday, right before season opened. But it's just like the way you had to get into that spot. I was like, we can go over there and try it, but I don't know. It'll be like, I just like that area, like where we were at, because some of that thicker cover is kind of tighter to it. But the problem is there's no water there. The other spot has water. So I don't know. I may try to go in there next week or so, because I'm about to bounce and go be hunting. Well, by the time this episode comes out, I'll already be almost coming back, but hunting with Greg May here, come down to Alabama where we can go hunt another area and try to get on some deer. He actually, I think he just shot a doe this morning on that public, but I don't know if he's found the deer yet. Said he just found a cell camera. Typical. But yeah, so awesome buck, great hunts. Do you want to do one quick Q&A and get Thomas's?
Yeah, let's do a Q&A. Let's do a Q&A real quick.
So congratulations, Thomas, first bow deer.
Thank you.
First bow buck, and he just Euro-mounted the deer. He's like, I don't care nothing about shoulder mount. Well, I mean, you couldn't shoulder mount that deer anyways.
No.
Not without getting a different hide.
And I can do it. I mean, killed it on Wednesday and I was done with it on Friday.
Probably
Get it back quick.
Yeah, it looks good. Okay. All right, we're going to do one Q&A here. I think I already know how all of us are going to answer this one. All right, this one is from Davey Hilly from South Carolina. He said, how's it going, fellas? I'm in quite a predicament. I am blessed to be able to hunt 10 acres of private for around a year now. I've run trail cameras and backtracked to 8 Point until I found him passing by in the daylight. For the last year, he has been the biggest buck I had on camera. I got in the woods Thursday morning before the hurricane and had him in the bed of the truck by 8:30 a.m. So he killed him. Good job. I knew he would be moving due to the change in weather pattern and the abnormality. However, I pulled my SD card after I shot him, and after checking the cameras, I now have a 7 Point that is a brute of a buck. In a year, I have never saw a deer and run cameras. Wait, in a year, I've never saw this deer, and I've run cameras all year long. He's way bigger than the 8 Point. I would guess he's close to 200 plus pounds. He looks like a walking deep freezer. My question is, since I shot the big 8 Point after my second sit, should I just manage? I almost combined those words and said a bad word. Should I just manage the land and take only does and let him breed? Or if he does slip up, go ahead and put him on the wall. Love the podcast. Been listening since early 2019. God bless. Kill that joker. What are you talking about? What do you think, Jacob?
Yeah, I mean, he's been breeding. I mean, he's a mature buck. He's been breeding deer for probably 3 or 4 years. So,
oh yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't be worried about that.
He's got little
plus, hey,
fawns running around everywhere.
Just realize this.
Yeah.
And we talked about this on the podcast with maybe Bronson Strickland and maybe Dr. Carl Miller. If a big buck breeds doe on your place, if that fawn is a buck, it's going to disperse off your property. It's not staying there.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great point.
So you're, don't want to say it this way, but you're kind of helping your neighbors out. And that's not where I'm trying to get at with this, but like that fawn is more than likely not going to stay in that area. That doe's going to kick that fawn off that yearling buck.
And he's going to go establish a separate home
range miles away. Now, maybe in 5 years he might come back during the rut or something.
Yeah, he might swing through.
But he's not going to stay on that property. So just heads up with that, the way they disperse. Again, Dr. Carl Miller and Bronson Strickland talked about that. So, yeah, I mean, dude, if you can get a pattern on that buck and kill him, I mean, it's only 10 acres. Now, what was funny, not funny, kind of funny. He said to backtrack that deer. On 10 acres, you backtracked him? Like, that's not a lot of land to be backtracking a deer. Like, I feel like
Yeah.
even like 60, 80 acres is kind of, I mean, you can get in the general direction, but like he's not going to be staying on that property. So it sounds like he's got a pretty good travel corridor that runs through that property that connects where that buck's coming through. So I'm going to guess also based off what he said that deer's probably come through at night. It's not during the daylight because he didn't seem overly eager right now about trying to shoot the deer. So, you know, just like anything on a small property, kind of going back to episodes like with Alan Summerford, who's a past podcast guest, hunts some smaller properties. The timing is everything on a small property. You know, not running in there and hunting it super, super heavy. You know, kind of letting your cameras help you out a little bit and kind of figure out when the deer, when's he coming through and trying to time it where you can kind of lay some of that pressure back off. But, I mean, do whatever you want. If you want to just manage some does, shoot some does, awesome. If you want to try to go kill that buck, go try to kill that buck. But it's cool that you had another buck show up, you know, right around when you shot that deer.
Yeah, definitely. Thomas, what do you think?
I mean, if you kill the 7, a bigger 9 or 10 point might show up then. That's kind of what I'm thinking.
Yeah, they're just going to keep getting bigger.
Yeah, they're going to keep getting bigger.
Yeah, get those bully bucks off the property.
Yeah, that's kind of what I thought.
Oh, sweet. Okay, yeah, we'll just do that Q&A because I think you got a long drive. We got to figure out some equipment here, and I want to go hunt today. So let's see what we
Let's
got.
do it.
Y'all got anything else?
Nope.
You got to start hunting with Mike a little bit. He's feeling a little let down.
Oh, I know.
You ain't hunting on weekends no more.
Yeah, I know. I got to make it happen with Mike. We'll get out there. We'll get out there.
You drag him along with you.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Anyways, just kind of recap everybody. Appreciate everybody again. I can't talk. Appreciate everybody that's been buying apparel. Again, all the hoodies, the shirts, all of our hats, everything else. And then again, on the store now, we have our new, again, custom grunt from Houndstooth. So go check that out. Purchase that grunt call. Again, there's only 48 of them. So if you want one, Southern Outdoorsman, little limited edition, engraved Southern Outdoorsman grunt call, go pick one up, and then send us a listener success story in when you kill a deer. Again, go out there, practice your grunts, super soft, build some confidence, do it around some does, and go out there and actually kill some deer grunting. So,
Yep.
Other than that, appreciate everybody's been writing in listener success stories. There's been some guys killing some hammered the last
Good deer.
5 days. There have been deer getting killed all across the Southeast. Guys have been writing in stories on them. Again, if you kill a buck this year, implementing anything you've learned from the podcast, whether it's from us, podcast guests, whatever, write it in. Again, there's a link down in the show notes, or just go over to the website, thesouthernoutdoorsman.com, and there's a tab there for the listener success story form submission. Submit your story. Let us know how the podcast kind of helped you out, past podcast guests or topics. Send us some photos, and we'll share that throughout the year. So really appreciate everybody sending those in. So thank y'all for watching the podcast. Thank you for listening, and we'll catch you back here in the next episode from the Southern Outdoorsman. And remember, guys, y'all stay Southern.